So what is phase? What is phase cancellation? If you're like I am and you record at home and you use only one mic at a time, you're unlikely to have any problems with phase. But if you use more than one mic at a time, or you just want to learn about phase and how it affects audio recording, listen on. I'm Keith from No Label, No Producer, No Limits.com. Let's dive right in. Let's talk about phase. I have two tracks here set up, Keith and Bizarro Keith. I have the same microphone plugged into both of them. I'm going to record, and when I end up, I should have identical tracks. Let's do that. Hey, yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, I should have identical tracks. Let's zoom in and see. Looks identical to me. Now this button here is a phase inversion button. Let's see what happens when I press that. It's interesting, right? You can see levels on the individual meters of the tracks. But up here in the master meter, there's nothing. Let's do it again. This time we'll turn the phase inversion on and off. Yeah, 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 yeah. Now why is that? Well, it's phase. The phase inversion switch turns every peak on this track into a valley. It reverses everything. And as a perfect copy of this track, when everything is reversed, they cancel each other out perfectly. In other words, every time this wave peaks, this wave is flipped and is the exact opposite. And that's phase cancellation. Okay, we have these signals again. They're perfectly balanced. They're out of phase. They cancel each other perfectly. What happens if I pan one to the right and one to the left? Let's listen. Yeah. Hey. And there you can hear they appear again. Why is this? Well, it's because the signals aren't being combined as much. This one's going out the left speaker, this one's going out the right speaker. Now, there's still some combination. The signal going to the right speaker still reaches my left ear a little bit and vice versa. So you might hear a little bit of phase cancellation in the air. However, in headphones, I don't think you'd hear any phase cancellation at all. Now, what happens if I check my mix in mono? As you can hear, once again, when they're combined in mono, the sound disappears. And therein lies the problem. You could have a mix that sounds great in stereo, and if you don't check it in mono, you might not know if elements of your mix will sound radically different or might even disappear altogether. Now, this is not the problem that it used to be back when mono AM radio was a big thing, and today even most phones have stereo speakers, although some people might be listening to your songs on a mono Bluetooth speaker. So it's up to you to decide whether this type of phase cancellation is a problem. At any rate, I'll show you how to avoid or greatly reduce any phase cancellation problems you might have. So now we have these identical voice files, and they are in phase, and I've got two of them and I want stereo, so how about I pan them left and right? I should have stereo, right? Well, no. Let me show you. I've got these panned left and right, and I'm going to play them back and switch the mono button on and off, and you won't hear a single difference. Hey, yeah, 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 yeah. Hey, yeah, 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 yeah. Now, why is that? Well, at its most basic, the definition of mono is the same sound coming out of the left and right channels. And these vocals are exactly the same sound. In order to create stereo, we would need to have some difference between the left channel and the right channel. And this is why, by the way, I see this in the forums all the time. people talking about, well, I duplicated my guitar track and I panned one left and right, or I duplicated my vocal and panned it left and right, and I don't hear stereo. Why is that? How can I get better stereo? And the answer is, well, because it's still mono if you have the same sound coming out of both speakers. So in order to get any kind of stereo imagery, we're going to have to make changes to one or both of these tracks. Let's start by throwing Bizarro Keith 10 milliseconds into the past. So I'm going to nudge this track 10 milliseconds to the right, and we're still panned left and right, so maybe we'll hear a little bit of stereo separation. Then we'll check it in mono. Hey, yeah, 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 yeah. Hey, yeah, 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 yeah. Now, not only did we lose the stereo separation when I went to mono, but it sounds a little bit thin and weird, and that's because phase cancellation is going on. Let's see how that manifests in the waveform. So I'm picking this peak right here and we'll zoom in. So right here, I'm just above the 0 line on this blue track, and I'm just above the 0 line on this gray track. So these sounds will be added together and they'll be stronger. Here, I'm below the 0 line on the gray and above the 0 line on the blue. They're going to subtract from each other. They're going to have destructive phase interference. Now, they're not perfectly symmetrical, so they're not going to cancel out completely. And what you'll discover is that with certain time relationships, certain frequencies are de-emphasized and others are emphasized. So we have, as we do in this example, this kind of weird thin sound. That is, certain frequencies getting sucked out and certain others being emphasized. Hey, yeah, 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 yeah. Now, where this is likely to happen in a home recording session, let's suppose you're recording a drum set and you've gotten your kick and your snare drum worked out, they sound great, and then you start adding the other mics to the kit. And you discover when those other mics come up, your snare sound now sounds thin and weird. Well, that's a phase issue, and we'll talk about how to solve it in just a minute. For now, let's throw this track another 10 milliseconds to the right. So we're a total of 20 milliseconds now back in time from this first track. Hey, yeah, 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 yeah. Hey, yeah, 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 yeah. That sounds a little bit less weird to me. You can certainly hear the stereo imagery when I take off the mono button. So we're 20 milliseconds out. Let's go to 40. Add another 20. And let's listen. Hey, yeah, 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 yeah. Hey, yeah, 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 yeah. The phase problems are starting to disappear a little bit. The body of the voice has come back a little bit. Let's throw it another 30 milliseconds out. So that would be a total of 70 milliseconds. Hey, yeah, 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 yeah. Hey, yeah, 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 yeah. And at 70 milliseconds, it doesn't seem to be a problem in terms of phase. Okay, we're going to talk about when phase cancellation problems might occur, but first, let's talk about where they won't occur. And I see this mistake in audio forums all the time. People say, I doubled my guitar part or I doubled my vocal and I'm getting phase cancellation. What can I do? And that's just not the case. If you record a take of your vocal or guitar or any instrument, then go back and do another take, you're not going to be able to get it close enough to create any kind of phase problem. So let me ask you, when you listened to the phase problems that we created by shifting one vocal a few milliseconds away from the other, did it sound like two people singing? Not to me, it didn't. It sounded thin and weird. That's because these waveforms are identical and we just shifted one a little bit. You can't match the timing and the pitch and the amplitude in such a stable way to create this thin, weird sound. What you will produce is an ever-changing tapestry of phase relationships. And that doesn't sound weird like what we demonstrated. It sounds rich and full. So when might we experience phase cancellation? Well, there are two main times when this happens. One is with parallel processing, and that's when you split a signal in your DAW and you send part of it through an effects processor, for instance, and it takes time for that processor to work. So it feeds the signal back at a little bit later time, and you have an effect similar to what we experienced when we shifted the vocal a few milliseconds. For the most part, your DAW should handle that internally and it won't be a problem. By far, the most common time that problematic phase cancellation occurs is when there are two or more mics in a room. Phase can be defined as the time relationship between waves when the waves are combined. But what does this mean for us in the studio? Well, imagine this scenario. You have a sound source and you have two mics in the room. Both mics are aimed at the sound source, but one mic is about a foot further back, or about 30 centimeters further back. These microphones are picking up the same performance. They're aimed at the same instrument. They're going to sound largely the same, much more the same than if the instrument played it twice and you double-tracked. However, there's one major difference. It's going to take the sound a little bit longer to reach the mic that's a foot further back. Sound travels about 1 foot every millisecond. Let's see what effect that millisecond has on the sound. In order to demonstrate that, I've got a pink noise track here, and I'm going to show you what that looks like on a frequency analyzer, Vox and Go Span. Notice the level, and notice that it's equal energy across the board, pretty much. Okay, now I have a second track. Let's unmute that. And I'm going to nudge this track 1 millisecond to the right, as if it's a second mic picking up this exact sound just a little bit later. Let's see what happens to the sound now. Look at the frequency response curve. This is called comb filtering because it looks like an upside-down comb. We have problems at 500 Hertz, there's phase cancellation going on there. At 1500 Hertz, at 2500 Hertz. These are all multiples of 500, so it's harmonics. The in-between levels are higher than they were previously. So we have some constructive phase where they're additive and some destructive phase where they subtract from each other. This is probably not the EQ curve you want on your sounds. But let's turn the second track down a little bit and see what happens. At about 9 dB down on the second track, it begins to get reasonable. This sound might even be musical, depending on what notes are being played. You can experiment with moving the mic closer or further away to see if it improves the musicality of the piece. Let's suppose we move the second mic closer to the first mic. So instead of 1 millisecond out of time, let's make it half a millisecond. I'm going to shift that 0.5. Now let's see what happens to the frequency response. I'm back at equal level. You'll notice that the phase cancellation has shifted upward by moving the mics closer together. We move the mics closer and closer and closer, and the comb filtering phase shift problems move up and up and up. And when we get the mics to where they are coincident or in the same place, the phase problems disappear because the sound waves are hitting the microphones at exactly the same time. So if you line up the capsules of the mics, you don't have phase cancellation issues. You can even angle the mics to get a little bit of stereo spread happening in your mix. You'll still avoid the phase problems as long as the sounds hit the capsules at the same time. And this is how the XY stereo miking technique was born. There are lots of stereo miking techniques. If you're watching on social media, I will link below to an article with more information on stereo miking techniques. For other cases in which we have two mics in a room, For instance, musicians might be playing live together in the studio or on stage. We utilize the 3-to-1 rule, which should be called a guideline, not a rule. Let's suppose you're going to mic a trumpet and you have a mic 1 foot away from the trumpet. Then you add a speaker cabinet and you're going to mic that as well with mic number 2. The trumpet mic is 1 foot away from the trumpet. The speaker cabinet mic needs to be at least 3 feet away from the trumpet. That's the 3-to-1 guideline. Now, let's say mic number 2 is 15 centimeters from the sound source, the speaker cabinet. Mic number 1 needs to be at least 45 centimeters away from the speaker cabinet. Once again, obeying the 3-to-1 guideline. Now, this doesn't eliminate phase cancellation. This is about reducing the level of the sound coming into the non-dominant microphone, if you will. So when we combine the microphones somewhere down the line in the mix, we'll have a very low level of sound source 1 in sound source 2's mic and vice versa. So even if there is phase cancellation, it's way down in level and you're okay. Now there's another case in which phase cancellation might play a role, and that is if you have 2 microphones on one sound source and you're not using a stereo miking technique. Let's say you have a guitar cabinet and you have one close mic and another mic that's designed to pick up the ambience in the room. Well, you're not going to have those microphones at the same level in the mix, so the phase cancellation will be fairly minimal. If you turn the ambient mic up to where it's as loud as the close mic, then yes, you're going to have problems. But what you want to do is mix them in a balanced way and move the microphone around until the phase cancellation enhances the sound. So again, remember in the demo, when I turned the phase canceled microphone up, the phase cancellation got worse. When the 2 signals were at the same level, the phase cancellation was complete. So if we pull that down, we're going to have less and less phase cancellation, and a certain amount of phase cancellation basically acts like EQ on the sound. If you're watching on social media, there's a link below the video which goes into more depth on this subject. And as always, if you found this content valuable, if you've gotten anything out of it, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. Until next time, I'm Keith from No Label, No Producer, NoLimits.com. Bye-bye.